Hey, there we are.
Hey,
Excuse me. Hey, welcome to our live stream, everyone. As you can see on the screen, I'm Randy. I'm a data guy here at PMsquare. And also on the call today, we've got Mike Nader. Will introduce himself in just a moment, I'm sure, representing Incorta. And as you might know by the title of our live stream, we're going to talk about Incorta today. The live stream title mentions direct data mapping, and we'll touch on that. But we really want to give a good introduction to the tool, a little bit of history and a little bit of potential to kind of get you familiar with what it is, what it can do, and maybe a sneak peek of what it will be as well. So before we get too much further in, Mike, we okay to start? I know you gave our producer a little bit of a heart attack there coming in at the last moment.
having some browser issues. I got it all resolved.
Rock and roll, man. Oh, excuse me. All right. I should mention right off the bat, right? We do these live streams weekly at PMsquare. This one is a little bit different. Typically, what I like to do is find a topic that I know a little bit about and learn a lot more about it by talking to experts. We're similar today in that our guest, Mike, is an expert at Incorta, but I also know a lot about Incorta. So we really got two, I would say, Incorta fans I'm talking today about Incorta and introducing it for everyone, which raises an interesting question that maybe we can start with. I struggle a little bit when somebody asks me, well, what are you doing or what are you working on? And I say Incorta. I say, what's that? And I've got 2 or 3 different answers that I can give depending upon the audience. But if I've got an unknown audience, or the stereotype there is if you get in an elevator, right? You get the elevator pitch. I kind of struggle to describe it in a paragraph. And I wonder, Mike, if you have a pat answer to that or a good intro general answer to how would you describe what is Incorta in that quick elevator ride?
Well, I mean, yeah, and you're right, Randy. That's always been sort of the more complex questions because Incorta does a lot, but very specifically, Incorta is a data platform. And if I think about the life cycle of data analytics, it goes from I've got a connection to a source through persistence or virtualization. Let's stay with persistence today. I have a level of transformation or enrichment I prefer to use. I simplify it with semantics, and then you've got the presentation capabilities. Incorta runs from connection all the way through. But the engine itself is the most important part of this. And frankly, there are pieces of Incorta that you can use portions of the platform along the way. So we'll talk, and I'll walk through some things today. In fact, I'll show things in the Incorta front end because we have an analytics and visualization front end. We love it. I love it. It's awesome. But that's the least important part of the platform. It's the engine, how it operates. It's the most important. And I've worked with the folks at PMsquare and other customers to do deployments of Incorta where Cognos is the front end, or MicroStrategy is the front end, or Power BI, or Tableau, or Looker. Completely normal for us to do that. So, but Incorta, to your question, is a full data platform from connection through presentation, and then really with a very unique engine, and that's what makes it most exciting.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I talk to kind of technology people or data people, I can get right into that, right? The engine's important, and here's what it does. And we'll talk in a few minutes about the direct data mapping. But you know why that was really cutting edge when Incorta started, and why it's still so quick and all that fun stuff. But if you're talking to a non-tech audience, I find a lot of times analytics leads to, oh, you mean like Tableau, right? Yeah. Or you mean like Power BI, and it's all about the presentation and the look, and I can drag and drop and get a map, things like that. And so I'm with you, right? My heart and soul lives in data and databases, but I completely get the other end of that spectrum where people are saying, well, what does it look like? And to be fair to Incorta, when I first saw it, it was a little bit rudimentary in terms of that customer-facing or consumer-facing display. And there's been a lot of progress in that area to where it's really useful now and can be its own all-in-one tool. But as you just mentioned, I love the fact that you can use it to feed anything, right? Yeah. So when someone comes up and says, hey, I love Tableau, awesome. You want it to run faster? You want it to run better? You want more stuff in it? We got a way to talk to it.
Yeah, I always like to say, and this is, I don't mean this in a negative way in the slightest, that the front end conversation is an emotional one because this is our day job to work with data, to have these conversations, to build these solutions. But most of our users, consumers of these technologies, their day job is completely something different. And they have a technology, whether that's sometimes it's Excel, then it's a connection into, but it's the front end that works for them. It works into their day and the efficiency of their job. And making that change it requires an emotional change. And so it's not as simple as this is a better technology or this has better visuals. To a degree, I don't know, the better visuals matter anymore. And that's not to say that they should be bad, but I think you can have adequate visuals and a presence and a simplicity for a user to engage, and you will be far more successful than a company A, company B, I'm not going to put any names to it, that have far better visuals, but just don't have the presence, don't have the simplicity of allowing users to engage. And it's always going to be, from an engagement perspective, I think it's when you make things easy, then people will start to uptake.
Right, right. Yeah, when you talk to someone who says, hey, I love Tableau, well, the first thing I like to say when I'm talking about Incorta is great, you can still use it, right? But the follow-up question is generally, well, if you don't have something available in Tableau, how long does it take you to get it, right? What does that request process look like? And then how much pushback do you get from the data or the IT folks? And, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 6 months later that you're finally getting what you want next? And I think that's where a lot of the strength of Incorta comes from, is that whole middleman can be, doesn't necessarily need to be if you have strong data governance and want to keep it, but it can be cut out, right?
Well, I'd say it can be compressed, no matter the technology set. After I connect to a data source, and I'm just going to focus generally speaking right this moment, I'm going to bring that data into some structure that I'm going to use, and then I need to simplify it in some way. Now, sometimes that's modeling from a third normal form to a star schema. Sometimes, not always the case. Sometimes it is leaving it in a 3NF and using it. That's more and more in Incorta's world. But there's reasons for that type of analytic, and that doesn't meet every use case. There's a lot of value in it, especially from the operations side. And so it's, those steps in between of, I have the data. What do I need to add to it? Do I need to calculate something? What rules do I need to apply? Do I need to cleanse it? And I'm not a big fan of the concept of dirty data. I think data is informative, whether it is meets your use or not. If it doesn't meet my use, but you thought it was going to, then either it's not the right data set, or you've got an operational problem that lets you inject incorrect or what you would otherwise term as dirty values into it. So feeds another analytic process. Got to clean that up. So I get it. I've got to clean that and add some level of rule and enrichment to it. And then I have to make it accessible for the user. And very often that is semantically speaking, or a semantic layer or something of that nature. Those steps are going to happen, whether they happen in Incorta, they happen in every analytic deployment I've ever seen. It's just how long does it take to do them? And
right.
That's really the difference, I'd say, in how Incorta operates. It's not that you don't have to do all of the steps in the same way, but you have the capability of performing all the actions. And everything you do is more compressed, more efficient from that perspective. And again, within the bounds of the right types of use cases for Incorta. And we'll talk some more of those in a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things, I know we're going to get into a little bit more of the cutting edge and the modern day Incorta, right? What it is and what it can be. But I just think there's so much value in what it started as and still is. And I learned the acronym UDAP, right? The UDAP from the Incorta website when it first came up as the Universal Data Access Platform, I think was what the piece stood for.
Yeah.
Which really just means it's all in one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And those are new. Apologies for the interruption. That's back when Incorta first started. There weren't many technologies like that. I mean, you might have a little front end, you might have some of this, some of that, but Incorta had this broad approach, and it was a nod in some ways back to completely different architecture and engine, but earlier, conceptually earlier technology. And now I think you're starting to see this more and more. I mean, you look at companies like, I'm probably going to get one of these wrong, but like when Databricks, who I can't remember, they recently acquired around data ingestion over the last year. So you start seeing, and Snowflake's going down those routes with certain activities, and then you've got other platforms that are being sort of assembled by grabbing technologies and extending what the core of those platforms do. So I think that the concept of UDAP, that Universal Data Analytics Platform, is really more in its heyday now than it was when Incorta first started. But that is really, that's the foundational origins of Incorta. It was really that from a full stack capability. That's where Incorta focused.
Yeah, so we're you work for Incorta, right? I'm from PMsquare, so we have a little bit different perspective. And at PMsquare, we partner with Incorta, we partner with IBM, we partner with AWS, right? A lot of different companies. I never want to downplay, right? What can you do with AWS? What can you do with Azure? What can you do with IBM? It's all really powerful stuff. The things that technology is doing now and is amazing to anybody that pays attention and is interested in it. But I really just love that idea of the universal platform as being accessible. And that, boy, if you want to start with something, it's so much easier to say, I'm going to start with this one thing. Give me an Incorta environment or an Incorta instance, and everything's right there for you. And you pull the data in, you can manipulate the data, you can report on it, and you don't need to pick and choose your services and your platforms. Which database am I going to choose out of the 18 that are offered in this cloud formation and things like that. So I really like that bit of simplicity, and I know Incorta has grown to be accessible to those other platforms. But man, I just think it's such a low barrier to entry and so accessible that anyone that was looking for how do I get started, that seems a natural.
Yeah, I gravitated towards Incorta very much for the same reason. When I was at Huron Consulting at the time, and had been at Ernst & Young and some smaller consultancies in between, and just similar to you, had done a lot of data work over my career. And I had in particular focused on Office of Finance solutions, some consolidation on the accounting side, but I specialize in really getting operational data out of various source systems into those platforms. And there's a lot of manipulation that goes on to do that. Now you're taking and dimensionalizing things, and so it becomes a lot of effort around it. And Incorta, the first time I played with Incorta, and actually I'll show you the thing that, of all things, the silliest thing that got me like giddy. Came home and told my wife about it. I'm like, you've got to see this thing. It's amazing. Was the drill through report, but that's not how the team in Incorta characterized it. So I sort of look at the platform in some respects it was the ultimate prototyping. If I had to use a survivalist analogy, if I'm in out in the woods trying to survive in the mountains or out in the woods, whatever, and I could only have one tool in my backpack from a data perspective, it'd be Incorta, because of everything that it does. Because I can prototype almost anything in the platform, and I have capabilities across whether that's standard analysis, or I want to write something in Python or Scala or SQL to do something a little more complex. That's available. It's possible. I can work with files. I can work with databases. I can work with, and so it's a really powerful platform across the board.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm anxious to see what you got to share. So we'll do that in just a second. But I'm thinking back to when I first saw Incorta, and I hope you remember this. I don't know if you do. You actually came out to the PMsquare office. Yeah. This is 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And the hook that got me interested in it was the number. I don't remember the exact number it was, but it was a very quick response time for a 1 billion row query. So, okay, that's pretty impressive, right? And the idea that you have this UDAP platform, which is a cool concept. And again, full disclosure, right? I come from an IBM Cognos background. So we had PowerPlay, which was something conceptually similar.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the UDAP idea was not new to me, but this idea that you could get, 5x, 10x performance out of billions of rows and really scale up the volume of data you were looking at, that's where I get excited about data stuff. So that's where I got excited about it.
Yeah, and a lot of that is you'll hear me talk about, or if you've ever heard me talk about, I know you have, Incorta, I'll talk about direct data mapping, which is really our engine. That's the core of what allows the platform to work the way that it does. And under the hood, that is a highly advanced indexing structure. In fact, it's the most interesting, probably the most interesting indexing structure I've ever worked with. Now, unless you're a database person, most people are like, yeah, okay, whatever. But there's a distinct business value in that, and it's what it enables, and what it enables for sets of use cases. And so that's when you talk about the billion row query, it works as efficiently in Incorta because of the data mapping engine, or direct data mapping. Incorta, leverages sets of modern techniques and technologies embedded in the platform. Direct data mapping is Incorta's invention. We'll talk about Parquet files. That's how Incorta persists data. We'll talk about when Incorta also has Spark enabled in the embedded platform, or you can use your own, or the embedded version doesn't make any difference. So now I can do, and notebooks. So now I have the ability to do everything in SQL and Python and Scala and R. And all of these are wonderful additions, but none of it works in the same way, and none of it scales in the same way without direct data mapping, and how that engine essentially is the foundation under the covers for it.
Yeah, I love that idea of the quickness, but also the scalability. When you say what kind of data volumes can you work with, it's like the old was it the Wild One quote, right? What are you rebelling against? What do you got? It's virtually limitless. It's similar to I guess an S3 bucket. You can keep throwing data at it as much as your cloud will hold. And then is a little bit in the weeds, but one of the things I like about Incorta is you can store that data as much as you want. And if you need to query it all, you can, but you don't have to, right? Yeah. So you can partition it and say, I don't care about the last 5 years or 3 years or 10 years. And that's what you read into memory, and that's what you work with.
Yeah, I mean, to your point on data volumes, I mean, I think the largest active data set, and I'm going to be out of date because I know one customer in particular that and this is an organization that's $40+ billion in market cap, and they have standardized on Incorta end to end. So I know the specifics of the volume, but it's enormous amounts of data. But if we talk about measures, we've got customers that have more than a petabyte of data in Incorta. If you just talk about records, I've watched customers work with 75, 80 billion row data sets in Incorta. And that's not every customer. Those are going to be on sort of the right-hand side of the bell curve. But it's not uncommon. I'd say a billion plus is fairly standard starting point for most of our customers in respect to full data sets, across the platform they're bringing in, and then it scales up from there. And you mentioned the memory components to that. This is also from a larger architecture perspective, that where if I go into, or you're working with a customer or your client in your case, that they're a Snowflake shop, or they have Google BigQuery, or that something else that's essentially acting as their primary data lake, or ODS, or whatever term we want to use for it. Incorta is not necessarily competitive to that. In most cases, I'd say probably 90+% of our customers, of course, they have the Oracle database, or they have Snowflake, or they have BigQuery, or they have other technologies. Incorta really represents if I put it in older terms, or that data mart analytic tier. And so if I've got 20 years of data, yes, I can pull it all into Incorta. But if you only really care about doing active analysis in the current year -3, then you could pull that in as live data, and everything else could sit quietly in cold storage, or frankly, it need not ever move. It could sit back over in X system and only pull it when you want it. And frankly, now go the other direction with that, where Incorta you can take it and do things with Incorta and then provide that out to those other systems as well. Now that's more, it's an extension of the UDAP concept, but we talk about some of the directions that Incorta is moving. That's definitely one of them.
Yeah, boy, I've got a kind of a tick list I'm looking at on my screen here, and I just want to keep talking and yammering away. But I know you've got a few things to show us too, so maybe we can take a break from me talking for a moment, and you can give us a look at Incorta and whatever the first thing you got queued up there is. We can take a look at that.
Sure, absolutely. And what I'll do is I'll just put a let me share my screen here. All right, Randy, are you?
So while you're getting ready to share, I'm just going to go ahead and shout out our email address here at PMsquare is Incorta1, Incorta, O-N-E, Incorta1 at PMsquare. So if anyone is watching and you have questions about Incorta, Incorta1 at PMsquare is the place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to answer them in context. Randy, are you able to see my screen all right?
I can.
Perfect. So I'm not going to do a bunch of slides. But I think it makes sense to give just a little more background on where the company started, especially with a nod to the UDAP. So I'm going to hit this slide and one other, and then I'll actually show you some things in the platform. For those who have not seen it, I know, Randy, you have, and you and I played with it for years together. But Incorta's, the genesis of the company was out of Oracle originally. The core founders of Incorta were all Oracle employees, and in particular, folks that had worked on Oracle EBS and other ERP, CRMs, HCM type products for the Oracle side, the BI application extensions of those, and more the general analytic capabilities. And the biggest problem that they ran into, even in an organization like Oracle, is that they could not get access to the details to explain the patterns that they're getting, the KPIs that they're getting judged against, or the patterns that they're seeing that might be a little different from last month. I mean, it's wonderful if I know the questions I'm going to ask every month, and you can build something for that, it'll run swimmingly. But if things change and I need to start changing the questions on a continual basis, that's very difficult for a lot of technologies to adapt to. And especially technologies, or especially source systems like an ERP, where the goal of those systems is not to be analytic in nature, but truly to never lose a transaction. That's success. Yeah, it should be fast, and yes, it should have reports, but my reports can be horrible as long as I never miss a dollar and never lose a sale and never drop an order. We'll deal with the other part later, baseline need. And so the team coming from Oracle with that background really set out to build an analytic engine that was designed around working with data and working with those structures. And that's really where the concept of direct data mapping and the whole platform was born. Because it was about, in so many cases, it was about, I'm going to have data spread across, Oracle ERP, an SAP environment, NetSuite, Workday, and those are just illustrative on the left. And I need to be able to work with that. And so in Incorta, you always talk about, ingest, map, enrich model. You could make that statement about any platform, or frankly, even Excel itself if you wanted to. But it's how Incorta does it that's different. And that the intention with Incorta is always to maintain the shape and structure of the source. So if I'm hitting an ERP that's in third normal form, I want to hit that same kind of an ERP or that same kind of a data structure in Incorta. But I need to be able to look at it from an analytic perspective. So maybe I need to pivot something in a different way. The ERP hasn't considered that, nor does it need to. It's not the job of the ERP. That's what Incorta was designed around. And on the right, Incorta has a UI. So you'll see BI tools, and Incorta's the first one there. And we'll look at that in a minute. We're open and always have been to allow like Power BI or Tableau or Looker or Pick to connect in. In fact, some of our more recent enhancements have been to harden, if that's not too contradictory a statement, but to harden the concept of we are an open platform, meaning that we have a SQL emulator on the front of the platform. We're no SQL internal and emulator on the front, but it's full ANSI compliant. So throw a query at it. It'll respond, and it responds remarkably well. And then, yes, like everybody, especially in the tech world, data side, Incorta has extended the platform in a number of ways to leverage and to build efficiencies with generative AI. And I'll talk about those maybe later if we have time, but that's not going to be the focus. As you stated, I want to look at sort of that UDAP concept. But just one other nod, and really those bottom rows is
we're internet obligated to use the letters AI at some point. So
yes,
we've got the green check mark. Yeah.
The last two.
So yeah, this is pretty interesting. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah,
but pretty interesting because I mentioned at the outset, right? I really like that UDAP concept and the simplicity and the low barrier to entry and accessibility and all that stuff. And you're saying, look, it still exists, but here's I don't want to put words in Incorta's mouth, but a phase 2 or wave 2, what have you, where, yeah, Incorta's still got that. That's still the picture in the middle. But look at all this stuff on the right? So I think we could always ingest from various sources. But all this stuff on the right is just expand, and more functionality that's available to you optionally, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I'd say it's the middle and the top line, because we always talked about, all right, you want to access from Tableau? Great, as an example. Incorta's UI, great. We love it. It's there. It's included. It's free, and it works. But we don't need to necessarily change all of your users. So everything else is really that extension. Those last two lines really represent direct partnerships that Incorta has and solutions where we will feed data to those downstream systems. And more on that in a little bit, but why don't we drop off the slides for a minute and I'll just go over to the platform. So there we go. Now, make sure I'm just connected here and didn't time out or anything. First click, so I don't just lose it. Okay. So I'm in the platform as an admin, and you're going to see all kinds of stuff in here because I'm logged in as an administrator. You can look at the tabs across the top of the screen, from home to content to scheduler, etc. Most end users, if you are using the Incorta front end, content, that's exactly as you would expect. That is where most end users start. And they only really see home, maybe, because that can be turned off or set to a report or something. They'll see content, that's the scheduler. And if I want to look at data inside of Incorta, you might see something, and I'm going to go to, let's go to something that's a little more, at least graphically interesting. A user may come in and start working with and analyzing data here from an existing, we call the individual components insights sitting on a dashboard here. And it's a fairly standard cast of characters that you'll notice as we go through, and frankly, abilities to extend. But that's what you're going to find on the content side of it. And scheduler is exactly as that intones. I can schedule anything here. I want to get a delivery of this particular report or this dashboard. How often do I want to do it? What format do I want to get it? And all that's built in. That's really in line with our, Randy, that core historical. This is the end of the process. I'm consuming that now that it's all gone through the semantics and everything else. But I think I want to start with, though, from an Incorta perspective, is I'm going to move all the way to the right and talk about, use really our marketplace to talk about the foundations of getting data into Incorta and walk this process a little bit. Now the marketplace you see here, this is illustrative of blueprints that Incorta has created on top of the engine for various use cases. So if I want to do something with JD Edwards, I've got it. If I want to send data to Blackline, I've got it. If I want to do analysis or send data over to IBM Planning Analytics, yes, I have that. I've got cross-functional data blueprints for Oracle E-Business Suite. So in payables and receivables and fixed assets, general ledger and inventory and HCM. Same thing with SAP and on down the line. So that's what you see on the marketplace. But it's, think about this as those are things built on the underlying engine, on the underlying UDAP platform. And components, these are extension components that have been added to by partners by Incorta, the platform, because it's extensible from the front end perspective. And connectors, these are just where do I want to start getting data from? And I think this goes back to the original days of Incorta here. So Incorta has access to a few hundred different connectors. Now out of the box, I think we ship with 30 or 40, and we can use I've had DB2 on AS400 for 3 or 4 customers. I use the IBM driver for that. They're JDBC connectors, mostly. And we also have a partnership with CData. So if you don't see a connector that you're looking for, you can probably pull one into the platform within a couple of days, easy enough. But it always starts.
One of the answers I like to give about where we can get data from is can you get it? And if the answer is that you can get data, then the Incorta can get data.
Yep.
What you were just showing there with the connectors is a database connection, but even if it's your web team pulling stuff through APIs, do that too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we've done a number of those types of projects over the years. It's not uncommon. A lot of platforms, that is their only method for allowing you to access data. I mean, really, put the other 3 tabs aside. I didn't show a couple of them there for just a minute. Let's talk about just the connection. And let's connect to something and pull some data in and just sort of walk the process a little bit in its purest form. What you're looking at on the screen are physical connections. This is no different than if I go to any platform that sources data, I have to connect up with the username or password or key code or whatever it is in. And so I'm going to hit this, for a demo today, I'm going to hit this online store. And it's an old version of the Microsoft AdventureWorks database, but it's wonderful for a demo. It's wonderful to help walk through the concepts of Incorta. I'll make sure it's actually up and running. It is good. And then just under the covers, you'll see standard set of dialogues to fill in. And if I were to look at Salesforce, you're going to see different options because Salesforce has potentially different options or SAP has different options, but this is a physical connection. So as you stated, Randy, if you can pull it, all I need is a connection. And if you can open files, Incorta can take pretty much any file type or JSONs or XMLs and use those. And so those can be pulled right into the platform. So that's sort of this sub tab here. Now, once we've got that connection, the very first thing we always do is let's just create a home for it. And I'll use a wizard to save us some clicks here. But there are any number of ways for me to do this, and it's going to put it in order. So I'm going to go looking for it. I'll connect into my online store. And now, based on the connection, I'm able to see these. Let's see how many here. 30 something, I think. 32 tables. Now, hitting a relational database, in this case, I could look at the SQL I'm going to use to replicate, and that's an important point. Incorta is an ingestion technology. We're not virtualization. So we're going to connect into and ingest the data and then continually update that through incremental feeds. More on that in a moment. But the very first step you see here is we're going to do a scrape of the tables we go against. And in this case, so I've got the core column name, the data source type, the label inside of Incorta, I can put whatever I want. I can change it later if I want to as well. The Incorta type, how does Incorta understand the data? How do you want us to understand the data when it lands? And then, frankly, how should Incorta use the data? Is it a key? Is it a dimension? What have you? In the last checkbox here, if there are existing relationships, key, foreign keys, joins, data source, Incorta will pick those up, bring them in. If they are not there, or I want to change them, or I want to go system to system, and system to system is probably one of our biggest use cases. I've got 4 instances of my ERP and 2 CRM instances that I want to pull together. Incorta is very, very adept at crosswalking those environments. And so this is just an acceleration point here, this checkbox. Because if I've got, in this instance, I got 32 tables and Incorta found 33 joins. And the environment looks under the covers like this.
So I think that if you're kind of watching and new to Incorta or learning or saying what's different about Incorta, that idea that you're doing the replication here of the database is pretty powerful and pretty important, right? So it's not a case of, like I mentioned, the person using Tableau earlier and saying, well, how long would it take you to add something to Tableau? Well, if the answer is I've got to go back and figure out where that lives in the ERP, and then I've got to bring that into a warehouse and then do 3 or 4 other steps, that can be a length of time. But here we're replicating what the source looks like. So you got it. Yeah. And it may not be exposed in that semantic layer I think you'll talk about in a few minutes, but it's here. And it's available to us already. Right.
Yeah, and the reason we do that, and the reason this is so powerful, it's not just the rows of data, but it's also those relationships. You click on any of them. And if I were hitting you, the reason I don't use SAP for this deployment, this example, is the table names are meaningless to anybody that doesn't know SAP. I do the same thing with Oracle EBS, but then you get this much more of a spaghetti diagram, hard to read. This is a very approachable example, but it's no different for any of those systems in that the relationships to us are critical. And the reason for that, this is what the underlying structure of the system is. This is how it processes. But simple business questions will cause huge angst sometimes in trying to pull data out. So it's an online bike store. If Randy, if you're the product manager for this, and you just want to know what are your product reviews by state, by product, by state, completely legitimate question. Product review sits here. To get to product review or to state, I got to go product review to product, to sales order detail, it's 3, sales order is 4, address is 5. I got to go at least 6 tables in. And I got to go relationship to relationship to relationship. That's the kind of problem you start modeling around as a data person, because I don't want to run a 6-table join every time I have a question. But the second I start having to model around everything, because traditional databases are not designed to deal analytic queries this way. Well, now I start hardening into which questions I can answer with this data set, which I can't answer. And if I need to make a change to your point on Tableau, how long does it take to add? What most users never see is I have to come back here and I got to figure out where it's at, as you mentioned. But then also, how do I build a model that not just for their question, but also gives me a little bit of, they're probably going to ask these 10 other questions. So let's make sure we accommodate as well. Now, Incorta, conversely, was designed, go back to those ERP roots. It was designed to deal with data in its normal form. And so that a data, once it lands in Incorta, is immediately usable. We do not suffer any performance penalty for running across join structures. In fact, we encourage it. We use it to build that index, that data map. Because within Incorta, that's what allows us to understand not table to table, really cell to cell. And so I don't have to completely deconstruct the model to then build something analytically useful. I can absolutely model. I build a calculation, it's modeling activity. Yes, I can model in Incorta. You always do. But I'm not forced to model for every question. I can model for analytic value. So if I want to do an average product review and it doesn't live there, okay, how many stars? Let's run an average. How do I want to derive it? Write that. that transformation and add it on to this. So we'll load data into these structures, and I'll run a full load, but you'll notice we also have incremental capabilities. So Incorta will incrementally load data as frequently as every 5 minutes. So we work with a lot of manufacturers, CPG, supply chain intensive companies and organizations, because it's when the intraday data matters where we become really valuable. Because if I can manage everything on a nightly batch load, or I can manage my whole business on a monthly set of reports, you probably don't need what Incorta brings to bear. It's wonderful, but your pain points are probably elsewhere in the business. But where you need to start understanding down to the day, down to the hour, down to the shift, that's where you see enormous benefits from a platform like Incorta.
Yeah, what you were just mentioning before about the 6-hop join, right, between tables is interesting, because that's my background. I write that in SQL and that'd be fine. But I also come back from that database perspective thinking, if I'm managing that ERP, there's no way I'm letting you in there to write SQL, right? Yep. Just unfettered. You can't just go explore. Whereas if I make this, I think you guys use the vocabulary data clone, right? Or system clone, something
digital,
like that.
Usually we'll call it a digital twin, sort of a term we borrowed from process optimization. But that's truly what it represents.
Yeah, so if I've got that, there's no harm in letting someone go in and go to it. Even if it's not in my fully vetted semantic layer yet, have at it, right? It's here. And if you want to go get it to the point of not waiting a long time, it's available to you. And you're not worried about, you're not going to blow up your ERP by doing it.
Correct. And I have customers, because of that digital twin concept, that they'll allow their external financial auditors to leverage Incorta to validate numbers, because it's a replicant of the ERP in the same shape with the same relationships. If a number's off, go make sure the load didn't fail. But I can show you exactly how I got the data out for every one of these tables. And so this is it represents a very different approach, because now this is immediately usable. Now we ran this load, and the only reason I pulled this screen up is just to highlight, like, Incorta's going to go table for table, row for row, bring that in. And then part of that process, I don't know if you caught it on the far right side, it says deduplicating and other things. So we'll do change data capture and feed that in. Actually, it's right in a little pop-up there. Okay. But in that post load, that's where we're creating that index. So Incorta takes the data. As I mentioned earlier, it persists in Delta Lake Parquet. Now, what that does for us is the compression in this environment is pretty stellar. So if I look at what I just loaded up, 25-ish million rows, I think it was a little over 25 million. It's compressed into 722 megs of space in the platform while I'm working with it. Even on the front end, it'll never decompress. Incorta does everything at this point forward on fully compressed data sets. And this is not, and I will say that a couple times, not something I would do, just say, hey, do this to a business user. I'm going to click this explore button in the upper right. What that's going to do is take us to the Incorta front end for a minute. And I'm only doing this to illustrate a point, because I play with this data set all the time. I still don't know what I need security rules for. But it's here. And if you're brand new to a data set like this, you're like, I have no idea. I got 32 different options on it. It's overwhelming. So I will simplify it, but just to give you an idea, if I look at, let's say I want to look at my product category and subcategory, and we build in search all over the place. And I want to do this by state. Oops. Hit the wrong button there. So let's say I want to look at this maybe by state, province name, even maybe my order date. And then finally, I know that line total here is revenue, just because I play with this data set a lot. Incorta is going to take data and aggregate that up. Now it's showing me that I have 967,050 rows. I'll stop the merging so you can see the line by lines. If I turn off aggregation, and this is happening dynamically, Incorta is working across, in this example, a little over 9 million rows of data. But under the covers, we're doing this. I didn't think about that. I just grabbed what I needed to work with and answer a question. But under the covers, Incorta has done a 7-table join. Some of those are composite key joins, and it's doing it on the fly. I always like to talk about this. This is what Incorta understands, so every user doesn't have to. It's part of how the platform operates. Oh, and you mentioned SQL earlier. Something that a lot of folks that have even used Incorta for quite some time don't always realize is we're no SQL internally, but this little SQL button in the upper right corner, and I use this all the time to cheat on things, I hit 7, 8, 10 tables. You can click on that and say, hey, if you wanted to write SQL for it, here you go. There's SQL that would generate that same output against that data source, against Incorta. Now, let me get out of this part. Back to the structure, this structure we're working with right here. What I want to do, instead of making the users deal with all of this, so I want to simplify it. So I'm going to go to this business schema. Now, this is virtualized within the platform. This is the goal here is really grouping like columns together for analysis. And I can do this I can make this aesthetically look like dimensions or a bunch of folders or what have you. But I'm going to create something really quick. And I'm just going to call this we'll look at do sales revenue. Now this is, as I said, this becomes our semantic structure. And I'm going to add a view into this. I can add a folder, but I can add that view, and I can add that view like I'm building a report. I can say create an analyzer. I can write SQL. That's a little newer. Or I can just write a SQL statement and it'll generate the output with the columns. If that's the way you want to work, I'm just going to drag.
If you're thinking of a traditional analytic or BI implementation, this is where the consumer would start to come into the picture, right? So what they would interact with. The other schema that you showed there, typically behind the scenes.
Absolutely. This is where if I'm working with a supply chain analyst or that team, what do you want to see? I've got it all. And I can make a change inside of 2 minutes. But what are we going to start with? Just keeping with that example we did earlier, I know I want my revenue. And I'm going to name it revenue. So I'm not having to worry about changing on every report. And you'll see in here some typing you can enable. And so Randy, one of the roadmap things, and I probably won't have time to get to all of that, but we've got a really expanded data cataloging for master data and integrations with Calibra and other things already live, but expansions there on the roadmap, just again, to make things more standard wherever possible. All right, so I don't know how much somebody's buying from me, or how much is being bought. Let's see what's being bought. So I'll grab category, subcategory. Again, I'll grab my product. Product ID, grab my product name. And then I don't think I have a bunch of customer information, but let me just grab, let's grab the ID. And then when, and then let's go with where. I'll go with my zip code. And then I got my state. Pull my state province name again. So again, just gives me an idea of, and I'm going to save this. This is the exact same data set. I've just chosen these 9 columns to represent my sales. So now when a user engages with Incorta, you provision them to this, whether it's a Tableau or Power BI or practically anything. They'll see not everything under the covers. And I can edit that, and I can go drag 10 more columns in here in 3 minutes and save it, and they're immediately available. I don't have to upload anything or make changes. But I'll build a simple pivot table, put states down the rows. It's just that, it's a pivot table. And I can round it, I can format things, there's all kinds of stuff I can do, but under the covers, again, what's important? It's what Incorta is doing, what it understands. And I'm going to save this just as sort of I'm an underscore guy. I don't have to put underscores there. I just have it.
I hear you.
Just a pivot table. But the neat thing about the way Incorta operates, let me just save us a couple clicks. I'll duplicate this, is conceptually, I never want to lose access to the details. Right? So I change this away from pivot table and I go back to my concept of a list table. It's like select star in Incorta. I can just grab all of that. And I'm going to put revenue, I'll put customer ID. No, move customer ID up, and move zip code up because it'll. And I'm going to throw some totals on this. Just total at the bottom. So you can see at the bottom, I've got 8.2 billion in product revenue. Now customer ID should not add up, so I'll tell it to give me a distinct count of customers. Yeah, do the same thing on the product IDs up here. Do the same thing there. Over 266 distinct products. I mean, there's 9 million sales transactions. This is the thing that this silly example that got me so excited about Incorta, and I was more graphical than this, but it boiled down to just this: is there's nothing in the data set that says in we use Indiana, just south of us. There's $37,991.32 of bottling or cleaners revenue. But it's correct, but it's an abstraction. It's the aggregation of it. The real data is in here, the 9 million rows, and they're all sitting there. I can scroll through them 1,000 at a time or change that paging, doesn't matter, but all the pages are there. Or I can just click and see that is 1,747 transactions. That adds up to 37,991.32. And it never misses. It doesn't miss because this is equivalent to the source system. I've got the transactional brain there. And if I wanted to, sticking with that UDAP concept, Incorta does build in, that search need. So if I want to look at helmets, I start typing, it's going to give me everything with an H in it. State, province, names, helmets is right there, but I'll be a little more explicit. Just all right, I want helmets. And then I want, let's say, Washington State. I can bookmark this. I can save this. Add that. Make it so other people can look at that bookmark. Well, it doesn't matter. Clear these out. At any point, I can come right back to this. And I can do that. All the data is still there. I'm not missing anything. The numbers tie. Well, 3.3 million, 3.3 million, 3.4 if you want to round it up. Same thing, 72,000 transactions. And if for some reason I need that data outside of Incorta as an end user, yeah, I could download that in Excel or CSV or any number of formats. And you can put a governor on that. And, if you're worried about people downloading data, but Incorta also audits it. So we have an audit dashboard in the background that's going to say, hey, Mike just downloaded this data off this dashboard with these filters. And so that's available for your administrators and for the folks that are focused on data security to understand what's sitting there. I mean,
and it's not surprising, since at the outset I said this was where I thought the real interest in kind of the initial value proposition was with the UDAP thing. But we've been talking, I guess, almost an hour. It's worth noting, even though we spent the bulk of the time on this, this is the beginning, right? Oh, yeah. And you showed a dashboard with all the cool graphics, and you could do whatever graphics you want. I just saw yesterday on Incorta's YouTube channel, Enterog had posted a thing where you can augment data now with data entry directly into the screen. I think it was through either an SDK or an extension. So all kinds of cool stuff, including what I mentioned before. We have to get the internet check mark, including all your AI, ML, that kind of advanced data science stuff can still take place within the platform, right? Even though we're not showing it here and delving in deeply, There's a ton of capability. Oh, there's your Copilot. Yep.
Yeah. And so you'll see Incorta from an AI ML perspective. Let's go generative AI to start with. You'll see it built in a variety of places. And it's based on different personas. If I'm an analyst and I'm trying to use the data, I can connect into a business schema and ask questions, and it'll generate insights. And hey, I've got an insight over here that looks like this already. And it'll answer questions for you. If you are more of a data engineering type of person, Incorta also has built in the concept of we call Data Studio. These are no code or low code data flows to generate curated data sets. And the reason I bring it up around generative AI is if I want to write something custom, SQL or Spark, I can just ask the Copilot to write it for me. But I also have, and this will take a minute to start up, but we call each one of these little blocks recipes. One of the recipes that is in the list is connect to a given LLM, and you can specify which one. You ask a question, take the output of that LLM and use it in your process. And so you can continually use it, continually check, and continually refine it. The other thing I really like about the way Incorta has done a lot of the generative features is, in particular, the SQL generation, Randy, is unbelievably good. In that, not only can I ask a question, but Incorta will show you the representative SQL of how it answered the question. Right. So if you're a deep data person and need to go verify, you can do that. It's not just about here's an answer and cross your fingers.
Trust us, right?
Yeah. So you see it built in all over the place. And the sort of last thing I can hop into here, as I know we're finishing up, is you can curate data in Incorta. So that the output of that data studio would be to generate a materialized view. I can build an Incorta table like I'm building a report. Just drag and drop, save it. It's a table in Incorta. But anything I can do inside of SQL, Python, Scala, R, what have you, I can just do here. I've got notebooking built in. So if I wanted to look at there's an AR prediction example in here, and this was a little more complex, but I like showing it. And there's your Copilot. So if you don't know how to do something, you can ask. But the neat thing about this is just a notebooking environment. This happens to be Zeppelin notebooks, I believe. I have to double check, and you can plug external in. But you're going to see the ability to, as a data engineer, data scientist, and this is more on the ML side, work through and come up with a model that essentially does an output for you with a goal on saying, I just want to predict my AR, slow pay or defaults or aging numbers. So I have a vision and a cash flow. And the output of that whole process is give me the invoice, give me the late bucket, give me the predicted bucket, so we can look and check the model, and then you can run that against all your historical payables or receivables. Sorry, not payables, receivables, and then start refining a process for yourself. So that's built in. So the platform itself is, to go back to that slide for just a minute earlier, is getting more expansive with the intention of, we have all this core operational data. We talk about it in Incorta really a lot these days. It's the data foundation. We are specialists in getting operational data out of those systems. And we have the ability now to do PDFs and unstructured data and knowledge corpus. So you wanted to look at, show me all my expense lines. Here's my expense policy, flag all the lines that are against policy. Or upload all my competitors' 10K, 10Q reports for the last 5 years. Let me ask questions directly against them to get information out. Yes, we can do that. But at our core, the roots of the foundation of the platform, when we talk about it as the data foundation, are the operational underpinnings of it. It's getting data from all of those systems of record on the left, making that available to use, whether it's direct analytics, which is where we started, extending out to other tools, because please, by all means, come in, it's your data. We just want to help with it. And then now into the business apps and Gen AI, And the last thing I'll say on the bottom lines is now we can send data out to those platforms. BigQuery is a good example. Anything Incorta ingest from cloud or premises system, even things we crosswalk, I can write and build BigQuery tables immediately. We work with more than a dozen Google customers today where their initial use case of Incorta was connect into my Oracle Cloud Fusion, Oracle EBS, SAP, Salesforce. I need to get that data over to BigQuery because that's my corporate, data lake or data standard. And then I want to use Gemini or Looker or things on top of it there. Incorta becomes the platform that not only can pass through the data in its natural form with change data capture, but also those semantic structures can be pushed as well. So I can crosswalk, calculate, and then just drop the output into your hyperscaler. I'm going to leave
I know
it.
you showed briefly there. Sorry, Mike. I know you showed briefly the data studio, but so that data can come straight across in its native form, as you mentioned, but you also have the opportunity if you need to do some cleansing or you need to do some manipulation, right? It's really sitting in the middle, letting you, again, optionally treat it how you want to. And then, look, if you don't want to use Incorta for your machine learning or your data science stuff and you have some other platform already set up, great. We'll push the data to you. You will have complete confidence that it's a digital twin of the source system, and away you go. I'm a little bit of an AI cynic, but one of the things I've enjoyed when I watch these AI presentations is almost uniformly and universally, the speaker will mention that the core of it and the foundation has to be the quality of your data, right? And so you're getting a lot more focus or refocus, I guess, on data quality, data governance, data confidence, things like that, which I think Incorta just fits so nicely into those conversations.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Because it is, again, if you're comfortable with your ERP, I'll use the ERP example. You're comfortable with the data that's in your ERP. It's already in production. You use it already to close your books, do all this other work. What you're looking at in Incorta is that data. And then what if I want to start tying 2 and 3 and 4 of them together? Far more efficient to do that in Incorta than all the Excel files and other work that tend to be the way it gets done at most customers. Or most companies, I should say.
All right. I do want to mention, because we kind of brushed up against it here at the end with the AI and the machine learning and whatnot. Probably not a topic for a future Wednesday lunch and learn or live stream like one of these. You may find that comes up on the PMsquare YouTube channel as an instructional thing. But also, I know in Incorta, you guys have published a bunch of stuff, and you have, I think, monthly customer success stories and whatnot that you do webinars and live streams. So I guess you can find those on Incorta.com to register for those.
And there's you've got Incorta.com, learn.incorta.com, docs.incorta.com, community.incorta.com, and then we have a YouTube channel as well.
Sure. So there's a lot of good stuff on there. I saw, like I mentioned, Anurag's instructional stuff earlier on the YouTube channel. I like the customer success stories. Just they typically highlight the things that are a little bit more cutting edge versus what we were showing as the foundational stuff. But it's a nice instructive message that no matter how where you start, right, the destination is almost limitless. Love that idea that you can just grow with it.
Yeah.
So I'll let you sum up if you want to, or give any kind of.
Well, I just want to say thank you. I mean, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to walk through. I adore the platform, always have. What got me excited was that ability to immediately see the details, because that's what I always got charged with building as a consultant. I want to be able to get to the details that matter, and it was the operations. It was always the operational data that was the hardest to get to. Incorta solved that problem, and that's really it. At its core, I still think its strongest value proposition is that I immediately have that. I can answer those questions in a click. Now you take the efficiency of that and the value that comes from businesses. We talk about customer success stories. The technology is always an enabling factor, but it's always somebody, it's somebody that understands their business, knows the kind of questions they want to ask, and they go out and they leverage the data that's now available, and they make really good decisions to drive phenomenal results. And so it's, customer success because it's what the customer did. Incorta is the underlying platform that helps in a lot of those use cases. And that's where, I love it. And it's what it enables is where you see the value.
All right. And again, by the way, thank you to Angie, who's our producer and marketing maven, for letting us go a little bit over. So thank you, Angie. Last little plug here. Incorta, if you're interested in it, I mentioned Incorta 1 at PMsquare.com. We can get you set up just about as quickly as you'd like with the Incorta 1 program. So reach out, let us know. And until then, thanks for joining. We'll see you again. Well, I won't see you again. Somebody from PMsquare will see you again next Wednesday. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you.